Hello everyone, I am Dr. Sridhar Raj. We are going to understand something about National Institution for Transforming India Aayog. National Institution for Transforming India Aayog, called as Policy Commission, is a Government of India policy think tank established by Prime Minister Narendra Modi after his having dissolved the Planning Commission. Pronounced NITI meaning policy in Sanskrit, the acronym stands for National Institution for Transforming India. The stated aim of NITI Aayog's creation is to foster involvement and participation in the economic policy making process by state governments of India. A bottom-up approach in contrast to the Planning Commission's tradition of top-down decision making. The Prime Minister heads the Aayog as its chairperson. Thus, while the Planning Commission had no representation for the state and union territories, the NITI Aayog has the Union Government of India announced for formation of NITI Aayog on 1 January 2015, and the first meeting of NITI Aayog was held on 8 February 2015. NITI blocks, which provide public access to articles, field reports and work in progress, as well as the published opinions of NITI officials, are available to the public on the Aayog website. NITI Aayog is a group of people with authority entrusted by the government to formulate, regulate policies in social and economic issues with experts in it. India is a diversified country and its states are in various phases of economic development along with their own strengths and weaknesses. In this context, a one-size-fits-all approach to economic planning is obsolete. Some of the objectives of this session are to understand the nature and functions of the National Development Council, to evaluate the performance of the National Development Council, to understand how NITI Aayog has come into existence, to know the functions of NITI Aayog and evaluate its performance in the light of liberalization and privatization. National Development Council. The National Development Council, which is called as NDC, is one of the key organizations of the planning system in India. It symbolizes the federal approach to planning and is the instrument for ensuring that the planning system adopts a truly national perspective. The NDC has experienced numerous ups and downs in its fortunes. The status of the NDC has been determined by the prevailing political climate and the support provided to it by the government in power at the center and the effectiveness of the pressures exerted by the state governments. Evolution of National Development Council. Way back in the year 1946, the Planning Advisory Board under the chairmanship of K.C. Niyogi had recommended the setting up of an advisory organization that would include the representatives of the provinces, princely states and other interests. The Planning Commission, in the initial days of its inception, had recognized the potential utility of such a coordinating body in the draft first 5-year plan. The National Development Council was set up by a proposal of the Cabinet Secretariat of the Government of India in August 1952. The functions of the National Development Council, as revised in the year 1967 following the adoption of the recommendations of the Administrative Reforms Commission, are as follows. 1. To prescribe guidelines for the formulation of the national plan. 2. To consider the national plan as formulated by the Planning Commission. 3. To assess resources required for implementing the plan and to suggest ways and means for raising them. 4. To consider important questions of social and economic policy affecting development. 5. To review the working of the plan from time to time and to recommend such measures as are necessary for achieving the aims and targets articulated in the national plan. Thus, The functional areas of the National Development Council revolve around the broad policies for socio-economic development structure. Right since its inception, the National Development Council has comprised top level representatives of the central as well as the state governments, along with the members of the Planning Commission. The issue of reorganization of the National Development Council was taken up by the Administrative Reforms Commission in the year 1967. The Administrative Reforms Commission, in its report on the machinery for planning interim report, had recommended that NDC should be reconstituted as follows: 1. The Prime Minister, 2. The Deputy Prime Minister, 3. The Central Ministers of Finance, Food and Agriculture, Industrial Development and Company Affairs, Commerce, Railways, Transport and Shipping, Education, Labour, Employment and Rehabilitation, Home Affairs, Irrigation and Power. Next, the Chief Ministers of all states, the members of the Planning Commission. The Government of India accepted the recommendations of the Administrative Reforms Commission in a slightly modified form. It was decided that the NDC headed by the Prime Minister should comprise of all Union Cabinet Ministers, Chief Ministers of States, Chief Ministers or Chief Executives of Union Territories and members of the Planning Commission. Accordingly, the National Development Council was reconstituted in the year 1967 on these lines. It may be noted that the National Development Council generally does not pass any formal resolutions. Committees of National Development Council. With a view to creating an ongoing mechanism for assessing the situation in critical priority areas, 6 committees of the National Development Council were set up following the 43rd National Development Council meeting held in the year 1992 and 93. These committees were as follows. The first one is on Committee on Population. This committee was designed to review the social and demographic dimensions, infrastructure and the needs of technology development relevant to the formulation of national population policy, to identify intervention strategies for population control on a holistic and intersectoral basis, to suggest a mechanism for securing commitment and support of the leadership at all levels for the implementation of population control programs, to recommend strategies for promoting people's participation in population programs, to outline comprehensive policies and programs for women's welfare, to review and recommend appropriate changes in the system of financing family welfare programs, and to recommend suitable mechanisms for continuous review and monitoring of the implementation of national population policy and the associated intervention strategies. The second committee is Committee on Micro Level Planning. The terms of reference of this committee included to define the scope and content of micro level or sub-state level planning in the context of state planning, to delineate the procedures and to envisage steps for making micro level planning operationally effective and viable, and to suggest national and pragmatic ways for involvement of people at the grassroots level. The third committee is on Committee on Austerity. The Committee on Austerity was entrusted with the task of identifying the causes of growth of total state government expenditure, suggesting areas where economy could be affected in establishment expenditure, non-establishment expenditure, subsidies, interest component of state expenditure, etc. Fourth committee, the Committee on Employment. This committee was asked to examine the employment situation in rural and urban areas and among the educated, the uneducated and women, to analyze the efficacy of social employment programs in employment generation and to suggest strategies, policies and programs for expanding productive and sustained employment opportunities in different sectors. The fifth committee, Committee on Literacy. The Committee on Literacy was set up to review the progress of National Literacy Mission as well as schemes designed to prevent future incidents of illiteracy through universalization of elementary education, to suggest strategies for enlisting the cooperation of Panchayati Raj institutions, NGOs, folk media, print media and electronic media in the promotion of literacy, to suggest structures and modalities for harnessing resources available at the Panchayat, block and the district levels in order to integrate the literacy movement with child care, child development, women's economic empowerment, population control programs, etc. and to suggest measures for providing post-literacy and continuing education for literates, non-literates and women. The sixth committee is on the Committee on Medical Education. The committee was set up to recommend measures for ensuring that the availability of medical, dental and paraprofessional manpower available in keeping with the present and future needs and to suggest modalities of expanding education in these areas in the public and the private sectors. Evaluation of National Development Council. The National Development Council was formed with an intention of providing the state government a place to voice their concerns about planning and allocation of funds. The National Development Council comprised of the Chief Ministers and the Union Council of Ministers as the members. The forum over a period of time took political color when the Chief Ministers of different states expressed their displeasure about the functioning of the central government. They criticized the central government for its bias in the allocation of funds and developmental programs. The policy document submitted by the Planning Commission was discussed by the members. Nothing much was done to address the concerns of the state governments at the National Development Council. However, it can be stated that the National Development Council provided a platform which acted as a tool to strengthen the federal setup in the country. NITI Aayog. NITI Aayog stands for National Institution for Transforming India Aayog, that is Policy Commission, is a Government of India policy think tank established by Prime Minister Narendra Modi after his having dissolved the Planning Commission. Pronounced Niti meaning policy in Sanskrit, the acronym stands for National Institution for Transforming India. The stated aim of NITI Aayog's creation is to foster involvement and participation in the economic policy making process by the state governments of India. A bottom-up approach in contrast to the Planning Commission's tradition of top-down decision making. The Prime Minister heads the Aayog as its chairperson. Thus, while the Planning Commission had no representation for state and union territories, the NITI Aayog has. The Union Government of India announced formation of NITI Aayog on 1st January 2015 and the first meeting of NITI Aayog was held on 8th February 2015. NITI blogs, which provide public access to articles, field reports and work in progress as well as the published opinions of NITI officials are available to the public on the Aayog website. NITI Aayog is a group of people with authority entrusted by the government to formulate, to regulate policies in social and economic issues with experts in it. India's Finance Minister Arun Jaitley made the following observation on the necessity of creating NITI Aayog. The 65-year-old Planning Commission had become a redundant organization. It was relevant in command economy structure but not any longer. India is a diversified country and its states are in various phases of economic development along with their own strengths and weaknesses. In this context, a one-size-fits-all approach to economic planning is obsolete. It cannot make India competitive in today's global economy. Members, the NITI Aayog comprises the following: the Prime Minister of India as the chairperson, 2. Governing Council comprising the Chief Ministers of all the states and Union Territories with legislatures and Lieutenant Governors of other Union Territories. Regional councils will be formed to address specific issues and contingencies impacting more than one state or a region. These will be formed for a specified tenure. The regional councils will be convened by the Prime Minister and will comprise of the Chief Ministers of states and Lieutenant Governors of Union Territories in the region. These will be chaired by the chairperson of the NITI Aayog or his nominee. Experts, specialists and practitioners with relevant domain knowledge as special invitees nominated by the Prime Minister. Full-time organizational framework in addition to Prime Minister as the chairperson, comprising Vice Chairperson Arvind Panagaria, members 3 full-time, economist Bibek Debroy, former DRDO Chief V.K. Saraswat and agriculture expert Professor Ramesh Chand. 3. Part-time members, maximum of 2 from leading universities, research organizations and other relevant institutions in an ex officio capacity. Part-time members will be on a rotational basis. Ex officio members, maximum of 4 members of the Union Council of Ministers to be nominated by the Prime Minister. Chief Executive Officer to be nominated by the Prime Minister for a fixed tenure in the rank of Secretary to the Government of India. Sindhushri Khullar appointed as the Chief Executive Officer. Secretariat as deemed necessary. Present structure: Chairperson Prime Minister Narendra Modi, CEO Sindhushri Khullar, IAS, Vice Chairperson Arvind Panagaria, ex officio members Rajnath Singh, Arun Jaitley, Suresh Prabhu and Radha Mohan Singh. Special invitees Nitin Gadkari, Smriti Zubin Irani and Tawarchand Gehlot. Full-time members Bibek Debroy, economist, V.K. Saraswat, former DRDO chief and Ramesh Chand, agriculture expert. Governing Council, all chief ministers and lieutenant governors of states and union territories. Aims and objectives of NITI Aayog. NITI Aayog will seek to provide a critical directional and strategic input into the development process. The center to state one-way flow of policy that was the hallmark of the Planning Commission era is now sought to be replaced by a genuine and continuing partnership of states. NITI Aayog will emerge as a think tank that will provide governments at the central and the state levels with relevant strategic and technical advice across the spectrum of key elements of policy. The NITI Aayog will also seek to put an end to slow and tardy implementation of policy by fostering better inter-ministry coordination and better center-state coordination. It will help evolve a shared vision of national development priorities and foster cooperative federalism, recognizing that strong states make a strong nation. The NITI Aayog will develop mechanisms to formulate credible plans to the village level and aggregate these progressively at higher levels of the government. It will ensure special attention sections of society that may be at risk of not benefiting adequately from economic progress. The NITI Aayog will create a knowledge, innovation and entrepreneurial support system through a collaborative community of national and international experts, practitioners and partners. It will offer a platform for the resolution of intersectoral and interdepartmental issues in order to accelerate the implementation of the development agenda. In addition, the NITI Aayog will monitor and evaluate the implementation of programs and focus on technology upgradation and capacity building. Through the above, the NITI Aayog will aim to accomplish the following objectives and opportunities: an administration paradigm in which the government is an enabler rather than a provider of first and last resort; progress from food security to focus on a mix of agricultural production as well as actual returns that farmers get from their produce; ensure that India is an active player in the debates and deliberations on the global commons; ensure that the economically vibrant middle class remains engaged and its potential is fully realized; leverage India's pool of entrepreneurial, scientific and intellectual human capital; incorporate the significant geo-economic and geopolitical strength of the non-resident Indian community; use urbanization as an opportunity to create a wholesome and secure habitat through the use of modern technology; use technology to reduce opacity and potential for misadventures in governance. The NITI Aayog aims to enable India to better face complex challenges through the following: leveraging of India's demographic dividend and realization of the potential of youth, men and women through education, skill development, elimination of gender bias and employment, elimination of poverty and the chance for every Indian to live a life of dignity and self-respect, redressal of inequalities based on gender bias, caste and economic disparities, integrate villages institutionally into the development process, policy support to more than 50 million small businesses which are a major source of employment creation, safeguarding of our environmental and ecological assets, evaluation of NITI Aayog. The Planning Commission set up under Jawaharlal Nehru's regime was a logical expression of an idea that underlay India's anti-colonial struggle, namely that in independent India an improvement in the material conditions of life of the people, subjugated and plundered through a century and a half colonial rule, required a comprehensive marshalling and conscious allocation of all national resources. It was an essential component of what Nehru had called as tryst with destiny. From the beginning, however, the planning process had suffered from several flaws, but in practice this instrument failed to achieve the objectives for which it was supposed to be used. The second obvious flaw was that the Planning Commission was envisaged as a mere departmental body of the central government, where there was no representation from the states. This did not matter in the beginning when the same political party ruled at the center and in the states, but it later became a serious limitation of the planning process, since this process came into conflict with the federal nature of the Indian polity. In this context, NITI Aayog seeks to facilitate and empower the critical requirement of good governance, which is people-centric, participative, collaborative, transparent and policy-driven. The next obvious question is whether NITI Aayog will achieve what the Planning Commission could not achieve in the last 50 years. Whether NITI Aayog will remain as a paper tiger or would do something constructive towards the social and economic development. To what extent NITI Aayog will address the regional imbalances in the country. To what extent NITI Aayog will be successful in suggesting the policies for economic growth and development of the country. To what extent the policies emanating from NITI Aayog will fructify in realistic sense. Will NITI Aayog survive the powerful office of the Prime Minister? To what extent NITI Aayog would strengthen the federal structure of the Indian polity? Although answers for such questions are difficult to get, the replacement of Planning Commission by NITI Aayog itself is a landmark event in the history of political and administrative governance of the country. NITI Aayog represents a step ahead in the process of policy formulation with a specific objective of transformation. Given the right kind of luminaries adorning NITI Aayog, it can be stated that it would play a constructive role in the social and economic development of the country, with the administrative apparatus playing a supportive role. Summing up, the advent of NITI Aayog need not create suspicion among the state governments. Although it is widely acclaimed that NITI Aayog has replaced the Planning Commission, NITI Aayog is considered to be a policy suggesting body. And given the changes that have taken place in the last 2.5 decades, liberalization and privatization, the role of NITI Aayog would be limited. However, given the importance of NITI Aayog, it is expected that it would provide the necessary policy inputs for the transformation of the country at the earliest. Write about the National Development Council and its role. Second one, critically comment on the functioning of NITI Aayog in transforming India. Third, how far do you think that NITI Aayog would be successful in fulfilling the dreams of common man in India? Fourth, is the replacement of Planning Commission with NITI Aayog a right step? Discuss.